Okay, now we're coming to the end of AKA Frank Green's time in St. Mary's Parish, Louisiana. This is, as far as we know, going to be his last abduction and eventual murder. And this is going to take place May 11th, 1978, with the victims Judy Adams and Bertha Gould. Um, he has now for sure murdered. Think about the last episode with the abduction of Bridget and Mark. And that was only on what or April 27th. So, only like 10 to 15 days later, he has that urge again. It's that disease. Regular people like us cannot describe this urge. But I have talked to serial killers and other people with murder. It's not just serial killers, but most of them tend to be, because they are very careful and try not to get caught, just like everybody. But it's a desire that you cannot quench. BTK Killer said it, very well in his interviews. You suppress it. But maybe this is a bad analogy, but I'll relate it to maybe masturbation. And how, not that it's bad, in some religion it is bad, but for the most people it's not bad. But it's not like you suppress it so much as you get an urge and you follow through with it. No matter what the stimuli is that brings that upon you, you do it. So the analogy there is that serial killers have that sexual desire as well, but instead of having the urge to masturbate, it's the urge to watch somebody in pain, as a sexual sadist does, and they get off on that. In Hohenberger's case, I think that at least I have come to the conclusion that abduction, kidnapping, bondage appears to be something that he enjoys. And that is not that uncommon, especially the bondage. I think of Joe Naso and how the bondage is something that got him off as well. So on April 27th, he kidnaps Bridget Sons and Mark Cannella. And I think I've explained it pretty well that Mark, the only known male victim of Hohenberger's, was killed because he was a witness. I think he could identify Hohenberger, maybe not by name, and say, hey, that was Frank Green. But because of his impulses and him striking when he did, he was basically, I feel, caught by Mark. And that led to him abducting him. And again, no big deal for Hohenberger. He makes his living out of abducting two people at the same time. So he just took Bridget, who was the object of his desire, his fantasy, and he took Mark as well because he wasn't going back to jail. There was no chance that he was going to let anybody who possibly could know him identify him to police. Hey, and I'm going to just kill Mark, and that's it, and then I'll have my way with Bridget. I went into the fact that I'm not sure whether Bridget was sexually assaulted or not. I am going to heavily lean that she was, but because she was clothed, it puts a little wrinkle in it for me. There's something there that I got to figure out. But we're moving on to May 11th, 1978. On Victor Boulevard, I believe it's the exact same boulevard that Mary Roderman was kidnapped on at the K&B drugstore. Now, I'm not sure how far K&B was from where these two girls were abducted. And from what I understand, I looked on the map, but it looks obviously so much different today than it did back then. But I understood that Victor Boulevard was the main drag in the area. So I'm going to go back to the police reports, because sometimes when I just regurgitate and it's like that with, excuse me, all cases, and anybody who is a host of a show or anything to that nature, when you regurgitate information, sometimes things get misconstrued, or taken out of context. I want to read right from the deputy from St. Parish, who wrote this report in 1984 about the kidnappings. On May 12th, Friday, the Morgan City Police Department received a telephone call in reference to two missing white female juveniles. The two girls had left home on the evening of May 11th, 1978, which is, you guessed it, a Thursday, to attend a local church fair on the grounds of the municipal auditorium. The two subjects, Bertha Gould, 14 years of age, and Judy Adams, 15 years of age, were taken to the fairgrounds and dropped off by Bertha Gould's stepfather. Both girls were to sleep at the Van Cleve residence after returning from the fair. When the girls did not return that evening, the Van Cleves assumed the girls were at the Adams residence. The Adams family also believed the girls were at McLeod residence. So you see how the confusion is there. One girl thinks they're spending the night at the other girl's house. Earlier the following morning, on May 12th, the Van Cleves went to the Adams residence and discovered the girls had not been home all night. At approximately 6:57 a.m., they reported the girls missing. Investigators revealed that the girls were at the fairgrounds as late as 10 o'clock p.m. Further investigation determined that Judy Adams had problems with her boyfriend and she was planning to run away. Remember how I said in the last video, back in the 70s and 60s, everybody, all kids that went missing were runaways. Well, in this case, there was issues with her boyfriend, so the parents also assumed that, I believe, because when I look at the very first newspaper article that I looked up, it has a picture, as you can see here, of Judy and Bertha, but what's the big headline? Runaways reported. So they're reporting that they're runaways, not victims of anything. It was also discovered that Miss Adams had broken off her relationship with her boyfriend the day before her disappearance. Mr. Van Cleve, who is the stepfather of Bertha Gould, stated that Bertha was very impressionable, and it was possible Judy Adams could have persuaded Bertha into running away. Investigation by authorities continued, and the local news media published the story and asked for assistance from the public. Hence, the news reports that they were runaways. On May 16th, a Tuesday, okay, so they were kidnapped on Thursday. Friday, they're reported missing because they've checked each of the girls' houses. Hey, she's not here. She was supposed to be at your place. No, she was supposed to be here. No, she's at your place. They're gone. They report them missing Friday. It's not until Tuesday, May 16th, that information was received from two white males in reference to the missing girls. The two men, I'll just say their first name, Jim and Michael, stated that they had been at the fair on Thursday, May 11th, at approximately 10:30 p.m. Upon leaving the fair, the two men were proceeding down Victor Boulevard in the vicinity of Ed's Muffler Shop. At this time, the two men observed a young white female running towards them, yelling for help. The men stopped their vehicle, and the female, later identified as Bertha Gould, came up to their vehicle and stated that a man had her girlfriend. At this time, the other white female approached their vehicle, and Gould thanked them and left with her friend. How does that make sense? Okay. Bertha Gould comes running up to these guys' vehicle and said, hey, a man, not two people, one man has my girlfriend. At this time, the other white female approached, so Judy comes up, and Gould thanked them and left with her friend. It makes zero sense. What's going on here? The men found the behavior of the girls to be strange. The men departed and went down Victor Boulevard, at which time they turned their vehicle around to check on the two girls. See, they knew something wasn't right either. The two men approached the vehicle, described as a late model Rambler or Plymouth Valiant or Volant. They observed one white female in the vehicle and the other girl being forced into the vehicle. Men reported that the license number LA9C180. However, it was not possible to get any information on that number as the registration was not in the computer. So you can see on this picture of Hohenberger's car, the license plate number. So on that same day, agents from the sheriff's office contacted the two men, at which time the men viewed an automobile identification book. Both men picked out a 1970 Plymouth Valiant, four-door automobile, and also possibly a 1964 Rambler. So they narrowed it down. Hey, it's one of these two cars. Now, I want to stop there for a minute because I'm going to tell you something. These two guys, and I wish I could give their names, but I just don't feel comfortable because they may not want people to know who they are. But Jim and Mike, buddy, let me tell you something. They're the heroes of this case. No doubt about it. Okay? They broke this case open. They knew something wasn't right. And they got that license plate number. Now, as we're going to see, it wasn't, one of the numbers was off, but smart detectives figured out, they ran a couple combinations and matched it to the car that they picked out. If it wasn't for these two guys, Robert Hohenberger could quite possibly still be out there doing what he's doing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And also the fact that they observed at the exact right time one of the girls being forced into a vehicle. Because if that didn't happen, if they didn't observe that, I don't think the police would have taken anything serious. They would still be runaways. Because that's what was reported to begin with. The odd behavior of Bertha running up to them saying a man has her girlfriend, and then Judy coming up, and then everything's okay. So police would look at that as, where's the crime? There's nothing wrong here. It's almost like a divine intervention that they went down, turned around, came back, and physically observed girl getting forced into that car. And that's what kicked everything off. Let's continue. One of the boys stated he was pretty sure about the license number. So police now know that, hey, this is the license plate number that we're looking for. And although one of the numbers was transposed with another one, the police were smart enough that they figured it out and they tracked that license plate number to an owner. The owner, when the police went there to ask about that car, said, I don't have that car. Yes, it's still in my name, but I had sold it. And I will pick up the story there. It had been sold 4 or 5 months previous to this to a man who lived in Bayou Vista. The owner stated the man's name was Frank Green. So at least they got a name, but you're going to see how police start connecting the dots. And he worked in Bayou Vista for a company known as R&M Services. So these boys, teenagers / men, saw the girls getting abducted, right? And they were able to get, this is the type of car it is. This is even better. This is the license plate number, fairly close. Police take that information, figure out, okay, let's run that license plate number to any of those vehicles that match in the area. They come back with a hit to this owner. They go to that owner. That owner says, oh, I don't own that vehicle. I sold it 4 or 5 months ago. Well, who'd you sell it to? Well, let me check the slip. Oh, I sold it to an individual named Frank Green. Okay, so police starts looking for Frank Green. They probably can't find anything because what? It's an alias. They're not coming up with anything. Well, can you give us any more information on it? Well, he worked for, he said, R&S Services. Oh, bingo. So now the police can go to R&S Services. Hey, do you have a guy named Frank Green working here? And see how everything comes together nicely. Agents contacted, let me go back. He was known to work for R&M Services. The owner further stated that he met a guy named Sidney, a work associate with Green, who was employed by Hammer Industries. Now, this Sidney, as we talked about before, is going to end up tipping Hohenberger off, and some people believe that he was an accomplice in murder with Hohenberger. Agents then contacted Fred at R&M Services in Bayou Vista. Fred advised that Frank Green had worked for him doing handyman type work and stayed at the R&M yard. Fred also advised that Green had not filled out any employment application and was being paid in cash. Remember I showed the work application? That wasn't for R&M Services. That was for his previous job. That was all fake, filled out with the alias of Frank Green. The R&M yard was checked for the 1970 Plymouth Valiant, but was not located. On May 17th, 1978, Fred was contacted again, at which time he stated Green had been living at R&M Service Yard, but had left on May 16th, which is a Tuesday, en route to Lafayette to find work. Now, that is a complete false. What had happened is that he got tipped off. He had kidnapped and raped and murdered the 2 teenagers, Bertha Gould and Judy Adams, on Thursday. Friday, they were reported missing. Tuesday, the police are now looking for his vehicle. They have connected the dots there. And that is the exact same day that Frank Green, Robert Carl Hohenberger takes off. Remember, he's not going back to jail. He's not taking any chances. Fred stated that Green was supposed to call him at 8 o'clock in the morning on May 19th, which is a Friday, to inquire about a job. So on the afternoon of May 17th, which would be a Wednesday, Sidney was located and questioned by agents. Sidney stated that Frank Green did own a 1970 Plymouth Valiant and that Green had left town for a few days to find work. So he's covering for him as well. Not as well, but he knows that that's not true too. On May 18th, which is a Friday or Thursday of the following week after, so 1 week exactly to the day that Hohenberger kidnapped Adams and Gould. Agents contacted Fred and showed him some composite pictures of the male who was seen with Judy Adams and Bertha Gould on May 11th on Victor Boulevard. Fred picked a profile drawing of the suspect, stating that it was Frank Green. The composite was drawn from descriptions given by the two men that saw the girls getting abducted. Fred also stated that Green had worked for Crew Services, that's the application that you see here, prior to working for R&M Services. And Green's date of birth and social security numbers could not be obtained. Fred gave agents the key to R&M Services, along with his consent to search the premises. However, Green nor the vehicle were located. Now, I got information that two agents, two sheriff's officers, two detectives stayed in Frank Green's room that night waiting for him to return because Fred had said, hey, I have a job for you. You can come back here. And he did not come back, obviously. So on May 19th, at approximately 1 p.m., agents met with Fred, which was a Friday. Remember, he's awaiting a phone call at 8 o'clock from Frank Green. And guess what? Frank Green, Carl Hohenberger, Robert Hohenberger, I keep saying Carl, Carl's his middle name, did call as arranged. Fred informed Green, hey, I have a job for you, and asked him to return to Morgan City. Green advised that he could not return at this time because he was too nervous. Now, that statement bothers me. What are you nervous? I mean, we know what he's nervous about, right? But one, it indicates he's tipped off. I want to know, did Fred say, what are you nervous about? Because it's not like they put his name out there to say he's wanted, because they're hoping that he comes back so they can catch him. So they haven't released any of this information yet. But yet, Robert Hohenberger knows, and he says he's nervous to come back. The building at R&M Services was checked, as well as Green's living quarters. Fred also supplied his phone bills with several numbers in California, Arkansas, and Florida that Green had called. During this search, it was also discovered that a .22 caliber rifle belonging to Fred was missing. The phone bills were given to agents of the FBI for investigation. Agents of the sheriff's office contacted Sydney in reference to Frank Green. Sydney was advised that a warrant for felony theft was being issued for Green. Sydney stated Green had left town to look for a job and that he hadn't heard from Green since that time. Sydney was then asked to view the composite drawings and advised that the drawings did resemble Green. At this time, Sydney was advised that Green was wanted for questioning in the reference to the kidnapping of several children, as well as the warrant for theft. Sydney was also advised that, should Green contact him, not to advise Green that he was wanted, and if possible, to find out where he was. So, agents are basically using Sydney to get to Frank Green. Hey, don't tell him anything. If you can work with us, well, that's not what he's going to do. On May 22nd, 1978, Frank Green was entered into NCIC, that's the National Database, and charged with a felony theft. He was not initially charged with the murders. Okay? In fact, he was never charged with the murders. A nationwide broadcast was issued to locate Green for questioning in reference to the missing children. On May 25th, 1978, agents at the FBI determined that the phone numbers called from R&M services by Green traced down as being the sister, brother-in-law, and ex-cellmate of Robert Carl Hohenberger. Hohenberger was wanted in California for kidnapping and rape, which we know. The FBI requested an attempt be made to lift latent fingerprints from R&M services to verify Green as being Hohenberger. So you see how this has now transpired and how police did such a great job, I feel, in connecting Frank Green to Carl Hohenberger. Okay, they don't know anything about Carl Hohenberger. The girls go missing. They get the license plate number. The license plate number comes back to somebody else, the owner. They go to the owner. It's a dead end. No, I sold it to a guy named Frank Green. They checked for Frank Green. There's no Frank Green. This guy's a ghost. And very intuitively, they check the phone records and then trace those phone records. Oh, he called Linda Hohenberger. Oh, called the brother. That's all it takes. If they didn't know the name, let's say they have a number, it traces back to Linda. I'm not going to say her married name now because I don't want people looking her up and all that stuff. But they go, if this is what I would do, go and interview her. Or you don't even have to interview her. You just do your background search on that name. And you find out that her real name is Hohenberger, her last name, non-married name. And then you start, oh, she has a brother. Oh, he's wanted. Great police work, okay? It's police work 101, but it's something that could be missed. So through those phone records is how they determined Frank Green was Robert Hohenberger, wanted for abductions and rapes in California. Now it all makes sense. Now everything's coming together for investigators. Well, now it makes sense that we got the right guy. Okay, we're not just looking for somebody as a witness. This guy's done it before. Let's verify. We have to verify it. We think we know. We're 90% sure, but we have to know for sure. So someone go in there and lift fingerprints off a Pepsi bottle, things that he had laying around because he left in a hurry. He just left his room and he's gone. Remember, not going back to jail. So they were able to do that. They lift fingerprints. Who do those latent prints come back to? Robert Hohenberger. So agents are like, holy crap. All right, we know who we're going after now. Now they have to locate him. At approximately 6 p.m. on May 25th, this is a Thursday, it's the same day that they track down the phone numbers and lift the latent prints and verify, okay, the person staying here, Frank Green, is not Frank Green. It's Robert Hohenberger, and he is our number one suspect of kidnapping Judy Adams and Bertha Gould. So around 6 o'clock that night, they go again back to R&M services. At this time, a very strong odor was detected near the building. Agents removed the septic tank cover and discovered a human foot protruding the surface. The tank was pumped out and a second body was discovered. Both bodies were bound and had been weighted down by a drill pipe, then dropped into the septic tank. The bodies were later identified as Bridget Sons, who was kidnapped on April 27th from the Penny Saver, and Judy Adams, who was kidnapped 11 May. In both cases, the coroner ruled the death by strangulation. All right, we're going to stop there because I don't want to get into the discovery too much because I'll do that in a separate video. I am sure that agents were very surprised, number one, to find bodies there, but once they did, to realize it's not the bodies of Judy Adams and Bertha Gould, right? It's Bridget's sons and Judy Adams. Where's Bertha Gould? I'm sure that they expected to find Gould and Adams. They didn't expect it, but once they found Judy Adams, I'm sure the second body that they saw there, they thought for sure was going to be Bertha Gould, and it wasn't. It was Bridget's sons, which ultimately connects him to that abduction as well. So everything is now coming together. Although everything is unraveled for Robert Hohenberger, everything is coming together for the police. And he has now fled. He knew it was getting tight, just like he fled California after the police chase. He's fled Morgan's Parish or Mary's Parish, St. Mary's Parish, and he's gone. In the wind. No one knows where he's at. But now the real police work has to begin. Okay? We have 2 bodies here. And you have 2 bodies, but really it connects him to 4 murders. Because in each case, 2 people, in each instance, 2 people were abducted. Adams and Gould, well, we found one of their bodies. Where's the other one? We just found Bridget's sons. Where's Mark Canella's body? They will find Mark's, as we know. But Bertha Gould's body is never found. So now police start thinking, well, we have Mary Rotterman. She disappeared the same way. Public, night, same vicinity. We need to be looking for her and evidence for her as well. And rightly so. But as I went through during her video, no evidence was ever found in regards to that. The one little tidbit that I read that I would like to, and I'm sure they followed up on, is when Hohenberger's car was searched, they found a pearl button in the back seat. Now, I can guarantee that's one of his victims. But which one? And that's why I was so adamant about the clothing, because it's hard to tell, but you can match that button up if one of them's missing from Adams, what Gould was wearing, Rotterman, things like that. It's a small clue, but it's something that has to be followed up on, right? I remember one time I was working a cold case, and at autopsy, a hair was found, and I thought it was very important that hair, because it was not the victim's hair, and these victims were strangled. So I thought it was very important that hair be examined. It was identified. I had to send it to an animal hair specialist, because that's what it ended up being. It was an animal hair. Now I think I sent it to Microtrace. I'm not sure if they're still around, but a guy named Skip Pelnick, I think was his name. He was well known. He identified it as an animal hair. So then I had to send it to an animal hair specialist to tell me what type of animal. Because, hey, okay, it's not my offender's hair, but if we can identify a suspect and he has a pet, then we can match that hair to that, and that gives us circumstantial, almost direct evidence that he's involved, but not necessarily. If he's a stranger, yes, it makes more sense. If he's an acquaintance, no, then obviously it can be transferred. But it was just like this pearl button, a very small clue, but it had to be followed up on. And it was identified as cat hair, and I thought that was a good lead. But then when I re-interviewed the victim's family members, they said, oh, she had a cat that came back and forth sometimes. So then I would spend all that time chasing a dead lead. It didn't matter. But you have to try, is my point. So there we have it. Judy Adams and Bertha Gould, abducted. Heroes in this case are those teenagers. I think they were teenagers, men that observed them getting abducted. Some odd behavior by them. I had somebody reach out to me by email who said they also had seen Judy Adams and Bertha Gould that night. She was driving down the road. They crossed in front of her, laughing, and they saw a man with a mustache following them. Again, may or may not have been Hohenberger, but it certainly is possible. There was some odd behavior there, but you can't fault them. You know, maybe, you don't know. You don't know what's going on inside their head. You have no idea what Hohenberger told them as a ruse to get them in a car. Nothing. And unfortunately, Hohenberger took those secrets to his grave, as well as we're going to find out in the next episode with the body discovery and Hohenberger's ultimate demise, and what investigators found, if anything, where he ended up in Tacoma, Washington, and why he was there in that particular state. So that's it for this episode. As we progress with Hohenberger, who is now unraveled, who is now, I believe, committed 4 murders, most likely 5, within a 2 months period, 3-month time frame. And we'll get into the strangulation, as the coroner said. We'll do that with the body discoveries and what that tells me about the offender and what it should tell you guys, and learn from this case. Trying to think if there's anything else that I want to cover before I end this episode. The notes I've been reading. Remember I said there were some notes that I received on a yellow legal pad that were handwritten, and that is what I was going off of, as well as this police report by the deputy from St. Mary's, because that's where the facts are. I assumed that the yellow legal handwritten notes were from the lead investigator. I was wrong on that, but I wasn't too far off. Those notes were actually from an FBI agent who was working the case. The FBI was brought in because you can aver that a kidnapping has taken place and they've crossed state lines. Therefore, the FBI has jurisdiction. And that's why they were brought in, and they reviewed the case. So what I was reading to you about Mary Roderman, when an FBI agent was making notes as to why Hohenberger was responsible for Roderman, and I said that they were very weak. And they are. He may know that, whoever the FBI agent, he or she. But they were trying to connect it. And for good reason. But there's no evidence at all that he murdered Mary Roderman. Although there are some circumstantial evidence, and certainly is probably enough to convince me that he did. That's it for Robert Carl Hohenberger, a.k.a. Frank Green, and his life and his crime spree is about to come to a crashing halt in an unexpected manner, and you can watch that in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Mains out.